after the wrong guy.
All right, we good to go? All right. Boys, the second to final, but the last one before Resurrection Sunday. So let's just jump into this. We literally just walked out of Good Friday service. And the question now is, as we look towards and wait for Resurrection Sunday, I think one of the things that would be fun and exciting, especially as people are listening, these maybe things that you've never thought about, is, well, what's happening right now? Good Friday, Christ is in the grave, in the tomb is sealed, and so what happened? What's happening in between the death and the resurrection? And so as we think about this, I think one of the helpful things to do is to first consider what didn't happen, because there are some things out there, there's some positions, some thoughts that maybe aren't super substantiated by the Bible. So what didn't happen?
Yeah, I think a really common idea that we've just kind of adopted is this idea that maybe there was some sort of almost cosmic wrestling that's happening where Jesus is going to hell and he's going to fight Satan and defeat him in hell. I really don't see in the Bible a whole lot of evidence that that's actually what's taking place. The defeat of Satan that's happening is in the death of Christ, and then is ultimately going to be completed at the resurrection of Christ. That's the victory that's won. There's not a sort of cosmic battle that's going on. I just don't think we see a whole lot of that in the Bible. Although I think it's a relatively common thing to kind of think that's happening. I mean, we've seen people throughout history that have held that position, but I think the Bible is a little bit less maybe dramatic about what's happening there. I don't think we have a whole lot of evidence there for that.
Well, when you think about the cosmic battle, it's been happening since the garden.
Yeah, that's right.
Sure. Right? And it's this idea, and I'm not trying to belittle it, but like I always envision this cartoonish kind of, like Jesus goes down, Satan's waiting on him, they take up their swords, and they fight each other. And what we would say is, they did that without the swords, and they did it on the cross.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? And the crushing of the head in that kind of culmination of the cosmic battle happened on the cross.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, Darren, what were you going to say?
Well, there's also the idea that Jesus went to hell to suffer, that he suffered physically, but that he would also suffer spiritually on our behalf.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a wrong teaching. I think, Jesus himself made a very bold statement on the cross just before he died, tetelestai, that Greek word that means it is finished. Yeah. That Greek word is in the perfect, future perfect, which means I've done the work and it is permanently completed.
Yeah,
so there was not more things that Jesus had to do in regards to our salvation. But even the idea that we talk about Jesus descending into hell, maybe we should talk about where that even comes from. The Apostles' Creed, which is one of our older creeds. It wasn't a creed that the apostles themselves put together. It's not even the oldest creed in Christendom. It does talk about Jesus after he was buried, he descended into hell. Yeah. And there are many people that believe that Jesus went literally to hell in the fiery pit, and Satan and all of that. So maybe we need to clarify what was going on with that statement and what is meant by hell.
Yeah, that's helpful. So I think part of what is going to bring clarity to this is for us to step into the muddy waters of Holy Saturday and what actually happened. As you start to listen to this, I hope that you hear this. One, this is really complicated. Yeah. Two, there are a lot of smarter people that is sitting at this table. You guys are geniuses. But there are a lot of people who are smarter than the dudes sitting at this table who disagree on this matter.
Not to interrupt, but if people had been listening to our conversation
Yes.
with our show prep, and even before we began this recording, we're not all in agreement on some things.
Correct.
And we don't understand it all.
Yeah,
So it is very complex.
and
I don't think I'd agree with myself from a day ago. I'm not even sure I'm on the same page there. So
I identify.
So we will get to where we somewhat disagree in terms of, okay, so then what do you think happened? But I do think there are aspects in which we do agree. And so in terms of what Martin Luther calls a tough nut to crack, what do we agree on? What happened Holy Saturday?
Well, I know that Jesus, one of the other statements that he made around the same time that he declared that it was finished. Remember the story of Jesus? He's crucified between the two thieves. And there's an argument going on between the thieves about who Jesus is. And the one thief on the cross says to Jesus, "Remember me when you enter into your kingdom." And what does Jesus say? He says, "Today you will be with me in paradise."
Yeah.
And so I think one place of agreement is we know that Jesus, when he was buried, his body remained in the tomb, but that his spirit was someplace else.
Yeah.
And he says paradise.
So it may be helpful in this moment because we may have some people who just are not familiar with the spirit world, the intermediate state. Jesus's spirit did the exact same thing that our spirits are going to do.
Right.
Talk to us, explain what is the intermediate state in terms of the spirit world? Like where did his spirit go and how are we to understand what happens after a human being dies?
Well, I think one of the things that we can do is get our terminology straight.
Yes.
We mentioned, did Jesus go to hell? Did he descend to hell? That's in the language of the Apostles' Creed. But what do we mean by hell?
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Our first response, because maybe our cultural upbringing, or maybe the shortcuts that we take with our terminology, we describe heaven with one broad swoop, and we define hell in one broad swoop, and our immediate response is that hell is the fiery flames, the eternal judgment.
Right.
And that's not what we believe was being referred to in the Apostles' Creed. There is a couple of words, one in the Hebrew, one in the Greek. The Hebrew word is Sheol. The Greek word is Hades.
Yeah.
And these are referring to the realm of the dead.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not the lake of fire. It's not eternal punishment. It's not what the Greek would call Gehenna. So it's the realm of the dead.
Yeah.
Old Testament terminology used by the Old Testament saints, Hades in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And so we're not talking about eternal judgment here.
Correct.
So when we talk about Jesus entering into the spiritual realm, his spirit entering in there, it is into the realm of the dead.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So human beings die, and until Christ returns and we bodily resurrect, which is our hope from Easter, we go to the intermediate state or the spiritual realm. And there are kind of two places. You go, the paradise is that kind of what we think of as the heavenly side, where you are not under the judgment and the wrath of God. And then you have the Sheol, which is kind of you are under the judgment and the wrath of God. So to this point, what we've explained is Jesus died. His spirit left his body, and his body is buried in the tomb. Then what? Nobody wants to answer. I love it.
I figured you would want to take a stab at this first.
Well, Travis, you've not talked a whole lot.
Yeah, there it is.
And
There
so I
it
think
is.
this would be a really good place for you to insert. But there is some discussion here.
Yes.
And
Yes.
this is where a lot of the disagreement
Yeah.
or confusion
Yeah.
comes into play. And there are some scriptures that point to the fact that Jesus may have done something else
Yes.
between his death and
Yes.
before his resurrection.
Yes.
So I don't want to be the first.
So
to
how about
jump into
this? How about I'll venture us into this.
Sure.
Because and here's what I would encourage you to, church, as you listen to this. It is the best possible, I think, in this moment to say, I don't know is a good answer.
Yeah.
Now, I also think hold your Bible, do good study, like hard work in the study, and then say, I don't know, but this is kind of what I'm thinking. So, boys, I don't know, but this is what I'm thinking.
That's
okay,
good way to put it.
Start there.
So I think based off of passages like Ephesians 4, 1 Peter 3:19, 1 Peter 4, I also think a general theology, which we don't have time to get into today, maybe at a later time, a general theology of what happens to the human spirit in the intermediate state, and what the intermediate state looks like in terms of paradise, Sheol, and as 1 Peter 3 talks about souls in prison in terms of whether those are angelic beings or not. I tend to think that Jesus went to his spirit, his body laid in Jerusalem, and his spirit descended into the spirit world. It was made alive in the spirit, into the spirit world. And as he was in Hades, in paradise, that he proclaimed the finished work of his death and his impending resurrection, because death had died in his death. And in that, he proclaimed that to those who were awaiting the coming Messiah in paradise. He proclaimed those who did not wait upon him in Sheol, and that he proclaimed those to the fallen angels. When you think back to like Isaiah 14 and rebellion initiated through Satan, who rebelled against God, and that it was kind of a final judgment moment for them as well. And so I think just really like to put a really neat bow, an oversimplistic bow on something really, really complicated. I think he went and I think he proclaimed his victory in that moment prior to the resurrection.
So to make it clear for those that are listening, can I just read the passage?
Yes,
please.
Particularly the 1 Peter 3 passage. Peter writes, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, when the ark was being prepared, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through water." And so that's the passage that primarily that you're referring to, that there's some other references.
Yeah.
And it really just comes down to timing.
Yeah.
I think we're in agreement.
Are we in agreement on location in terms of all being together?
Yes, maybe that's something we should take a moment to try to explain a little bit, because again, we have these shortcuts when we talk about eternity, hell, heaven, because we'll go to our funerals and we'll proclaim that our dear loved ones are in heaven, and we automatically tend to think that's a place more than it's a state. We know that there is a future new heaven and new earth that is coming, but there is a time period between when we die, are buried, and before we experience a resurrected body that's going to be some point in the future. And we will exist in a spiritual state, but our bodies remain here.
And our spirits will long to be reunited with their bodies.
Absolutely. And so there is that, what is sometimes referred to as the intermediate state. It's not a bad state. This is not purgatory.
That's right.
This is not limbo. Those are wrong doctrines. We are in the presence of the Lord.
That's right.
To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord.
Yeah, that's good.
But in the future, there will be a future resurrection where we will receive our resurrected bodies. There will be judgment, and then a new heaven and a new earth will be established, created, and we will exist forever. But we're talking about this in between point.
Right. Correct.
And is it okay to call it heaven? Absolutely.
That's it.
It's paradise.
I agree.
You're in the presence of God. And so I think that's important for us to understand that. But beyond that, what are we going to be doing? And what is Jesus doing?
Right.
And especially when we get back to this particular verse where it talks about, he died for our sins, and that he was put to death in the flesh, made alive in the spirit, and then he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison. The question is, what is the prison? And where is it? And in this intermediate state, what we believe is that when a person dies, both saved and lost, they're entering into the realm of the dead. And that we're all in that realm, but there is a good place to be, which is in the presence of the Lord. But those who have lived lives of rebellion and sin, unrepentant, In other words, unsaved.
Yep.
They will also go to the realm of the dead, but it is not in the presence of God. It's apart from God. And their suffering begins there.
Yeah. So to connect the dots on our theological conversation, when we talked about propitiation, these are spirits. Some have experienced propitiation. The wrath of God is not against them. And some, the wrath of God is still against them. Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So, and I know we could get into the weeds of, who are the spirits in prison?
Right.
Is this prison, is it in this realm of the dead? Is it happening between the death and between the death and the resurrection of Christ? Does it happen after his resurrection? That's where some of our debate and discussion I've wrestled with it and continue to wrestle with it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to identify the particulars. Was Jesus in the realm of the dead? Absolutely. His spirit was. Was he preaching to the spirits of human spirits, or was this angelic beings? I'm open to both of those. I think where our agreement is he was proclaiming his victory. And that's the biggest takeaway. That he had completed the work on the cross when he died, and he's commending his spirit to the Father. He says that I commit my spirit in your hands. And so he has entered into paradise, and as a part of that, even then or right after his resurrection, he is proclaiming victory, and that's what we should take away.
So the guy who wore the Southern Seminary shirt today,
not a good day.
help us think through perfection of this theology.
So I am happy to say I'm really not sure.
Absolutely.
I think that's good for us to say. I think that's okay. I think it's important for us. Like, I think the Bible's really clear on some things. We need to say with clarity, this is what I believe. And then I think we need to be able to hold things open-handedly. So I'm going to say things, and I'm going to hold these open-handedly.
Sure.
They may be different than what I said yesterday when we talked about this, and they probably are going to be different tomorrow when I read something else on this. I'm of the persuasion that when Peter says that Christ was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, I'm of the persuasion that what Peter's talking about there is that Christ has died, his body is buried, and his spirit now is separated from his body, right? Just like what happened with us. And so this proclamation then, in a sense of like, when does this happen, is happening in that moment, right? So the proclamation that's made, he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, is happening when Christ's body is separated from Christ's spirit. That would be what I would say today. You ask me tomorrow, you hand me a different book, maybe I say something different. But right now, that would be, I think, probably the position I would hold.
So if I kind of push the mud away in all of this, that we tend to, there's two kind of realities happening here. One, Christ has died physically in his body. His spirit does not die, and it is in the intermediate state, and it has gone. Darren, I think that's where, like, what you know for a fact, and boy, would I agree with you, he is proclaiming victory.
Right.
It could be in that moment. It could be after that resurrection.
Can we also be very careful here when we see this language in 1 Peter 3 that he is preaching or proclaiming to the spirits in prison?
This is good.
This is not gospel proclamation to lost people who have a second chance to hear the gospel and respond. We know Hebrews tells us very clearly in the book of Hebrews that it is appointed for man to die once. And then the judgment.
That's really good. Because like when I say proclaim victory, that is the same thing, that he preached to the spirits. That is a preaching, a proclamation, not an evangelistic preaching. And it's critical. That's a really good. But he makes that proclamation. He preaches proclamation, not evangelism. And it could be in between on Saturday. It could be after. That's in terms of kind of how your mind's thinking. We tend to, Travis, really open-handedly think that I tend to think based off of the made alive in the spirit in which he then went. I interpret that somewhat sequentially, that it's happening Holy Saturday. But again, it does not, what I think we're meant to pull from this, what we're meant to pull from Peter and Paul in different places is not, did it happen in that moment, but is, did it happen?
Yeah.
And you better believe it happened.
Yes.
Christ's victory has been proclaimed. This is the already not yet, it's going to keep happening of Philippians 2, right? That every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. I believe that in that moment, that began. He went down, he proclaimed his victory, and they recognized him as the Messiah who was always going to come, who defeated death, who was about to rise from the grave, and their spirit knees, that they didn't have knees, but their spirits bowed before him. And so I believe that starts there. I think one of the things to help in kind of landing this plane is to talk about, well, why does this matter? This has been probably a little bit more the complex in terms of theological things we've talked about. And I don't want us to miss why this matters. We don't talk about Holy Saturday a lot. We don't talk about the realm of the dead a lot. And so there's a little bit of like, oh, this is fun, but doesn't matter. I would say it matters a ton. I think the first thing for me and why I would say it matters a ton is that when Hebrews tells us that Christ was tempted in every way, the Bible talks about his experience of life in the same way that ours is. Christ fully experienced death.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
Right? There's something, we were talking about this yesterday in terms of like how people view death. Scary is not the right word, but just super like uneasy.
Like unsettling.
In terms like, unsettling is a good word. Yeah. In terms of what happens in the lead up to death, the experience of death is what we talked about. And it is unbelievably intimate to me that Christ fully experienced what I'm going to experience. Yeah. He fully experienced what my loved ones are going to experience. When his body laid somewhere in Jerusalem in 33-ish AD, his spirit had departed from his body the same way BJ will one day lie in a grave. Yeah. And his spirit will not be in that grave. Right. And so I think it's important that as we relate in terms of like what Jesus, like he fully experienced the death of a human. Yeah. Why do you guys think this matters?
I think almost to pull on that thread just a little bit more, I think it's helpful for us just in thinking about this topic to help remind us that we're spiritual beings.
Yes.
We live in a very naturalistic society, meaning like the world around us wants to think about everything in terms of a scientific process and materialistic realities. So like, okay, this is like we're human beings and we are just flesh and bone and that's it. Yeah. And one day we die and that's it. And I think sometimes that can infiltrate our thinking even as Christians, and we tend to think about ourselves in a physical sense, and we kind of stop there. Yeah. And to allow ourselves to consider ourselves as spiritual can almost be kind of odd. Like nobody else is thinking this way. Nobody else around us is thinking about us spiritually, where, centuries ago, this would have been a really normal kind of thing to think. For us today, we don't really want to think that way. Yeah. I think it's good for us as Christians to remember we're spiritual. We're not just bodies.
And what happens when you think about like this material world and the physical, like if all you think, because there is a large section of humanity that believes we're only physical. Yeah. Right. It leads to humanism. Yeah, that's it. Leads to, okay, well, if I'm just physical, I need to experience as much pleasure as possible in this world, and I live for the moment, and it doesn't matter what I do in terms of other people, and I just need to bring as much pleasure into my life as possible. So the moment that we forget that we are dichotomous people, we are physical and spiritual, we will lose sight of what God's doing in this world, in us and through us.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I think it's important. We talk about Jesus' resurrection as the first fruits of the host of resurrection, and we put a lot of hope in that.
Yeah. Yes.
And so, Jesus has been resurrected. He's had that experience. I'm going to have that experience too. But to also know that God himself, incarnate Christ, went through death. Yeah. He's been through the same experience that we will go through, and he comes out on the other side resurrected. Is a very hopeful and encouraging thing. I'll tell you another takeaway and why I think this discussion is very important. It's amazing to me how much of our theology in our perspective of life and what comes after life is shaped by things outside of the scriptures. I used to have this belief that Jesus did go to hell and he fought.
Yeah.
He actually literally fought Satan. You know where that came from? I've shared this with you guys a little bit. I was in college as a college student. Our church put on a Easter production.
Okay.
I was going to say cantata, but it was no music. It was just a production.
What is a cantata?
A cantata is a musical. It's
It's like Italian food.
It sounds like a taco. Go ahead, keep going, please.
We'll invite our worship pastor to come explain what a cantata is at some other podcast. No, I portrayed Jesus in this play. We called it The Victor. That was the name of the play, but it was actually based on a much older play called The Harrowing of Hell. And basically, it's about how Jesus died on the cross, he was buried, and then in that in-between time that we've talked about, he literally goes into hell and fights Satan. I remember playing Jesus. I didn't have this, hair that I had today. It was a little, in our telling, Jesus, had a little bit lengthier hair in the back, with this side shave. So,
Wait.
Yes, it's true.
Wait.
He had a mullet.
I had a mullet.
You had a mullet.
He had a mullet.
It was the early 90s, I think, or late 80s.
That's wild.
Jennifer, we need pictures.
But at the conclusion of this play, we had the gates of hell, figuratively built out of styrofoam, and I took one column of the styrofoam and put it across the other to form a cross. And Jesus had won the victory. And I will tell you, boys, I held on to that view theologically for a long time.
Yeah.
And here's my encouragement. As we look at things like this, please get into the Word and process it through the Word. And don't automatically assume that these cultural things that you've heard, whether it's what Jesus did between his death and his resurrection, or what heaven's going to be like and when it's going to come, get into the Word and study it and find your encouragement there.
Amen. That's really good. So based off of that encouragement, I think a good place to land the plane is Acts 2. And I just want to read this. Acts 2, 22 through 28 says this: Men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with mighty works and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves know. This Jesus, delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men. Here you go. God raised him up, loosing the pangs of death, because it was not possible for him to be held by it. For David says concerning him, I saw the Lord always before me, for he is at my right hand, that I may not be shaken. Therefore my heart was glad and my tongue rejoiced. My flesh also will dwell in hope. For you will not abandon my soul to Hades, or let your Holy One see corruption. You have made known to me the paths of life, and you will make me full of gladness with your presence. Here's what we know. Christ's victory has been proclaimed, and he holds the power over death, over sin. And he will raise us up bodily the same way he rose bodily. Church, as we look to tomorrow in that celebration of Resurrection Sunday, may you be filled with the hope that the one whose body is separated from his spirit on this Holy Saturday, it will not remain that way, nor will yours. Christ be with you.